Let's Talk Tunnelling is produced by XRJV and proudly sponsored by DC Adams Group, Why Safety Matters.
Well, Fred, welcome back to Let's Talk Tunnelling. Thanks again for your time. Appreciate it. So what we did last time is we had Fred on. He got right up to Sydney tunnelling. So we'll just carry on from where you left off, Fred.
Yeah, no worries, Dallas. Good to see you again, mate. Okay, yeah, so we spoke about quite a few of the interstate jobs that I'd been on. Want to touch briefly on a few of the Sydney jobs,
Yeah, please, mate.
being some of the biggest jobs around. Just before we do that, I don't want to throw a spanner in the works, but there was one other little thing I wanted to mention about Legacy Way. I know you were on that as well. Something which I've never seen done before. I'm sure it probably has been done elsewhere, but I've never been involved with it, and it blew my mind. All the rock, the excavated rock that went out of those two massive tunnels went by conveyor out into Brisbane Council quarry, straight through a drill and blast tunnel, through the side of the mountain and into the quarry. So no trucks went on the road anywhere. But when it come time to backfill the part of the tunnel to bring it up to road level, the engineers designed a system where they could reverse the drives on the conveyor belts that took all that rock out, and then rock was all fed back in from the quarry back into the tunnel once all the drainage and conduits and everything had been installed in the tunnel. It was then filled up to the level where the road base went on top of it. And I've never seen that done before, and I just thought that was a brilliant bit of engineering to design it. So,
do you know if that was always the original plan, or during that process? Because how long did it take us to cut that out? Probably a year and a half, because we had some really good meters there, didn't we? So, was it always? Do you know if it was always in the original plan, or was it just sort of about?
It was being tossed around. They toyed with the idea of bringing it all back in by trucks, but I think the lack of access into the site around Mount Cootha there would have meant it was very expensive to do it that way, and so it blew my mind the way it was designed. It took a little while, took a couple of months, I think, month or 6 weeks to finish setting it up completely, so that all the drives were reversed, so that you then were running the belt in the opposite direction, bringing the rock back from the quarry into the tunnel. And I just thought it was a fantastic innovation. We just put scrapers at different positions along the tunnel drives, so that where you wanted more fill, you put that scraper down onto the belt, and it diverted material off the belt and filled in that part of the tunnel. So fantastic. And as I say, I'm sure it's been done elsewhere in the world, but I've never been involved with it, and it was a terrific innovation.
Oh, that's great, mate.
Anyway,
yeah, well, I didn't think of that. I do remember, like, I was pretty nosy anyway. I was sort of one of those guys that sort of talked to the engineers quite a bit, and even the planners and that. And I asked about, even that tunnel, that drill and blast tunnel you talked about through that to the quarry. And I remember seeing, even it might have been even in the induction, where they talked about the reason of having that conveyor through there was to take the haul trucks and everything off the main road, and especially around that area too, where they would have been on those roads constantly, especially the amount of rock we kept coming out of that.
Hundreds of thousands of tons, and sensational in that we didn't have to have a truck on the road, and then reversing it to bring rock back into the tunnel was just terrific, and
that's a great
innovation.
Yeah,
just goes to show every tunnel I've worked on, there's been something different, whether the spoil's gone by barge or trucks or trains or whatever, and in that case, it just went by conveyor straight into a quarry. So, it was
that's good, man.
A lot of cost savings. Anyway, enough about Brisbane. I know you live there, and I like Brisbane too, but we might move on to Sydney, eh?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, I saw you had Brian Marshall on a while ago, and that's what prompted me to agree to come onto this program. I have a lot of time for Brian. He's a bloody good superintendent. I first actually worked with Brian. I've worked on same projects as Brian numerous times, but haven't actually had much to do with him. But we crossed paths on the Sydney Opera House job where I did the initial site setup. I was only going to be there for a couple of months until Brian could come down from Brisbane Airport Link and take over the job. But ended up being there, I think it was about 4 months, and it was a great job. Really, really intricate. I didn't envy him one iota because you had every conceivable service. You were digging around through, under and over, gas, water, sewer, live, dead. You didn't know what they were until you actually got them, because there were so many unmarked services in that land there, where since the Opera House had been built, laws have changed dramatically as to marking services, etc. And so, yeah, that was a very interesting job. A couple of things.
What was your role there? So you did site setup. So what's involved in site setup for a job like that, Fred?
Did the first bit of excavation. I was there with just mainly subbies to start with, and they set up site sheds, the office block. We started the excavation of the decline, going down to where Brian then excavated out this big loading dock underneath the Opera House itself, with elevator shafts, etc. in there. But a couple of interesting points on that Opera House job. We basically had archaeologists there nearly every day, because things we were finding as we went down through the layers of fill, because that's all fill there that's been built on. And we knew we were going to find these artefacts, but just what they wanted to do with them was another story. So
hang on. So when you say fill, when you look at Barangaroo, where they sort of built that out to put that casino and even that station that's just broken through on the metro. So that little point there where that Opera House is on, that's Backfilling, bit of an island, is it? Man-made.
Basically, yeah. Basically, there's a lot of fill there over the top of good sandstone. So yeah, it's levelled it all out. All that forecourt area is just all shitty ground on top of. Goes down a few metres and then you strike the good sandstone.
Wow.
But we came across original Bennelong sewer, handmade by bricks with convicts coming down. It was buried in down about 4 or 5 metres. And so, yeah, at one stage we looked like having to cut out about 1 metre of it and send it away, but that was not feasible. So we had people there taking lots of photographs and measurements and things, and storing that away for posterity. Another good spot that they found was just over beside the Opera House. There's a place called Man o' War Steps. It's there today, but we came across the original ones made of sandstone, dug out into the sandstone steps there. And so, yeah, that was all photographed meticulously and measurements taken and that. So, yeah,
so how do you, when you set up and establish, say, a tunnel site, which is a construction site, especially on the surface part, there's a lot of action underground. But the planning, and this is a real interesting thing for me because, I'm a tunneler, so we really only get there after all that's set up, isn't it? So we don't really know what's involved and what you have to plan. So
yeah. So yeah, we were lucky in that we knew a lot of those artifacts were going to be found because it had been noted originally when they were originally buried when the Opera House was constructed. But yeah, for us to sort of take it easy, expose them, let the archaeologists take all their photographs and measurements. So plus the services. There's a lot of restaurants there and around that area, all with gas, water, etc., sewerage. So you've just got to watch. You hit something there, and you're going to put some expensive businesses out of operation.
So as a tunnelling supervisor, Fred, and who do you talk to, and what part do you play in that, or do you just go to these meetings and listen to these people talk, look at your plan and what you have to do as a tunnelling supervisor? So how does the message get relayed to you, and how do you execute it?
Okay, yeah, we sit in these meetings, and you'll have engineers there with drawings of where they think services are, and if they cross paths with where we need to excavate for footings or the decline, for example, well, then we bring in vacuum trucks, or sucker trucks as they call it, and we'll do non-destructive excavation. We'll vacuum out areas around where these services are located, or where we think these services are located. And I think that's the greatest thing since sliced bread, that it saves a lot of shoveling, by hand. Simply, it's a really strong vacuum, sucks out the dirt and rock and that until you get down to where you know that, okay, there's no services there. That's where we're going to dig. So you can dig safely without the risk of striking anything. So they're expensive, but it's cheap in the long run. If you strike a, high voltage power line, it can cost you people's lives, or, hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. So a few $1,000s for a sucker truck is very cheap, and saves you a lot of headaches.
So there's a lot more, there's a lot involved before we turn up and dig a hole, isn't there? That, like I can only imagine, like I said, we just turn up and it's time to head down the tunnel and start cutting out rock. But I suppose the people listening to this that are only involved in the excavation side, but to know what's planned and what's involved prior to us turning up, it's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite big. Nowadays, you find it's very common for the superintendent, the tunnel superintendent, he's usually there nowadays from site setup as well. So it's becoming more common that they're involved with the actual establishment. Brian would have been there much earlier, except he was still tying up a lot of loose ends up in Brisbane on Airport Link. And so he arrived and he had all the tricky stuff to do underneath the Opera House itself.
So how does the transition go when you say start a job? You obviously, how do you and someone else comes on to take over?
Yeah.
How do you make that transition?
Oh, that's easy. I only ever went there. I was asked to go there as a fill-in role, so I knew it was only going to be, as I say, it was supposed to be only for 2 months, but then I was asked if I could stay on for another couple of months, and yeah, only too happy to. So no, those sort of things, part and parcel of it. I had no problems. As I say, when we went there, it was only ever going to be a short-term, just a start-up job. Originally, sorry, I know I'm not meant to mention names, but originally the company was going to send me up to a job in central Queensland, but then there was a change of government and that job got canned. So I ended up doing a few more jobs in Sydney. So worked out well. Things always turn out for the best eventually.
Good. Yeah. So what happened? So the Sydney jobs, you were down there for a little while?
Yeah, well, that as I say, that Opera House job, that was a good one, but very short and sweet. And then later on, I think the next Sydney job I did was probably Northwest Rail Link. Big job through the northern suburbs of Sydney for rail tunnels, and a lot of station sites along it, a lot of new station sites, and I was involved on a couple of those different sites with same thing as the Opera House, doing the initial site setup, just setting out the station boxes, as they call it. They're a big rectangular excavation for the stations. And then spent most of that job out at Kellyville at the concrete precast yard, where they make the segments for lining the tunnel.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be a beauty, a really good job.
Can you give us a rundown of a precast work in the precast yard and what actually happens there? I haven't actually explained it, or no one's really explained, the line. Oh, they've explained the lining of the tunnel, and I've had TBM operators, segment erector guys come in and talk about putting in these segments. But do you mind telling us where these segments come from, how they're made, and how they're processed and then brought to the tunnel stations?
Yeah, no worries. When I first went there, I had a little bit of trepidation because all the workforce there were going to be labour hire, and I just thought it's going to be pretty hard to motivate guys to put in a good effort, knowing that they're not the highest paid people on the project, But it couldn't have been further from the truth. I got there and those guys were brilliant. They're just so self-motivated and just kept pushing and pushing to set higher benchmarks every week. There was a similar factory, similar design set up over in England for the rail tunnel they were building over there at the same time. And they were supposed to be the ants' pants, the bees' knees of concrete people. And our guys at Kellyville just smashed them. They set all sorts of records every week. They got better and better. But to answer your question, it's actually like a batch plant, mixes the concrete there on site. There's steel molds come through, and the concrete with the mesh, with the fibre, the steel fibre in it, drops into these molds. It's vibrated, and the guys finish it off with the trowels, close the lids up, and then these molds travel around on a conveyor system, get baked in the oven for a few hours to speed up the process of the concrete curing. They're then demolded, lifted out, and every single segment has a brand in it, its type and where it's going to be situated in the tunnel. They're all named and all numbered, every segment, and that's all logged in. And they're stored out in the yard in stacks. I don't know if you've seen any of the photos of the segment yards where the stacks are about 12 high. They're quite impressive. And every one of those, because there's all different shapes there's about 6 or 7 segments, depending on the individual tunnel, go together to form a ring in the tunnel, and they all lock together like a 3D jigsaw puzzle. Now, as I say, each one of those has got its unique number on it. And when they're loaded onto the trucks by the gantry crane operators out in the field outside, they have to be loaded in the correct sequence so that when they get to the tunnel site and they go down into the tunnel, because once they go into the tunnel, they can't move them around. There's no room down there to swap them around. So right from when they leave the factory to when they get to the site, the delivery site, they have to be in the correct sequence so that they go down the tunnel in the right sequence.
Oh, really?
And my main role there at Kellyville was training up crews of guys on the gantry cranes to load these segments onto the semis as they came in, because we were generally delivering to 2 different sites at the same time. And at one stage there, we had 3 sites as the TBMs progressed through. And as I say, the guys just got better and better every week. And there was serious concern initially that the segment factory wouldn't be able to keep up the production, keep up with the with the TBMs on that project. That was soon put to rest. They were producing way quicker than the TBMs could use them.
Yeah.
Then the next concern was that the guys couldn't load them quick enough and deliver them out to the TBM sites quick enough to keep up with it. And that was put to rest as well. The boys never ever ran out of segments at either of the TBM sites, so it was very pleasing.
It's almost a specialised job too, isn't it? When you think about it, that's how important it is.
Those gantry crane operators were sensational. The first couple of weeks, they hated my guts because I was pushing, and I just had to convince them that they could do a lot better than, I couldn't do better. They were much better operators than me, but I had to convince them that they could do better. And I think they did it just to prove to me that they could do it. And they smashed it. They were delivering enormous amounts of segments every day, and
good one.
And it's a very specialised operation. You can't be damaging the segments with the grab. Like there's a hydraulic grab on the end of the gantry crane that has to go down over the pack of segments, 3 segments in each pack, pick them up without chipping them or damaging them, swing them across, cart them across the yard, lower them onto the truck in the right sequence, let them down gently on the truck without any damage. So, yeah, really, really great effort. And when I left there and went on to more tunnelling jobs, I wish I could have taken everyone. They were fantastic workers. The work ethic was immense. Didn't matter whether it was 45 degrees, blazing sun, or pelting down rain. The only time they ever weren't loading was when there was actually lightning crackling around the gantry cranes. That was too dangerous, but they'd be out there in pouring rain, loading trucks, blistering heat, because in amongst that concrete, it was just like an oven because they stored the heat in the concrete.
Yeah.
So, I couldn't be prouder of the effort they made. It was sensational.
I remember visiting a precast yard. It wasn't that one, but one later on a major project down in Sydney. And I was doing my safety talk anyway. I got talking to a few of them, and they were really interested in the tunnelling side of the operation in the project. And a lot of them, were asking me questions of what it's like down the tunnel and stuff like that. And I actually found when I asked them what they did, and they explained to me their roles and exactly what you're saying about how intricate and unique it is, I was actually interested in what happens there. I ended up saying to a lot of them that your job is so important. And now that I've come to physically and visually seen what you do and how much is involved, every little bit that you do here impacts us as well, because like you said, everything's lined up, it's numbered, it's all in the right sequence. And we get it down there. And I had to explain to them, I said, the importance of having it perfect here can affect us, because we can't swing a truck around, or we can't, just take one out because we're waiting for that, because that's actually holding up our roof or our ground. And, if we can't move forward or we can't put that segment in, then that's exposed. So when I explained that, they were like, they felt good about themselves because they were part of the project, even though, they might be 20, 30 Ks down the road. They are a massive part of the project. I think a really important part, to be honest.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's part of how I motivated these guys to get better and better and better, because it wasn't bullshit. I was explaining to them, if they don't have those concrete segments at the TBM site, the TBM stops. It can't just keep on tunnelling for an extra 50 metres and we'll come back later and put up those segments. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have the segments there for the TBM, or it stops, and then it costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars every day. And so I pointed out to them, I said, you're the most important cog in the wheel. I said, without you guys going, the tunnels stop. They just stop. There's no ifs or buts about it.
Yeah, well, I was, like I said, I was on this project I found them really interesting for what they told me. They found me interesting for what I talked about, especially our tunneling environment and how important these segments were to us. And I remember an engineer, a senior engineer, asking me questions a bit as well about, the interaction between me and them. And I said to him straight up, these guys are actually really interested in where these segments go. As soon as it leaves the yards and they wave to them and say goodbye segments, that they have spent so much time on them, we should really invite them along and see where these segments go up, or give them some sort of idea. And he actually said, what a great idea. Maybe I'll bring them along, or we should have a bit of an opening day or something like that, or some sort of way we can work it out where they come and they see the first ring installed. We have a bit of a ceremony or something about it, so they actually can see where, because you guys build these segments way before the excavation started, isn't it? So it has to, you're almost 6 months to eight months making segments so they're ready to go. By the time we start cutting, they've got to be continuous. So we can't start cutting and then wait for these segments. They've got to be made, haven't they?
Exactly right.
So they could have been there knocking away segments for months and months and months, and then they go out the gate and they finish the tunnel and they never get to really experience or see where these segments are going. So I thought it was, and he said to me, that's a great idea, Dale. We should really integrate that into, those first segments, having a bit of a gathering, invite the precast yard along, to all these people come along and have a look at how they go up. I don't know how we could do it, put a bit of a viewing platform, or even, this sort of stuff. Show it live so they can see it and see their creation or their segments being erected and the TBM launching off. I don't know, like whether it was done or not, I don't know, but I think it's a great idea, and that's part of being together.
On that Kellyville job there, so many of those guys were dying to get into the tunnel and work in the tunnel, but it just wasn't going to happen.
Tell me about it. I think I left there. I could have had a recruiting company there. They were asking me for some jobs.
Oh, exactly. And when I left there, I was able to, with the blessing of the next superintendent, I was able to get 2 or 3 of those, guys come across on board onto the tunnelling. And to this day, they're still working in tunnelling and loving it. And
good on you.
As I say, I wish I could have got more, but there's just so many that they can fit in,
Yeah.
But anyway, that was another good job, Northwest Rail Link. See, the trains are now running through it without drivers and going well. So
and you're part of it, mate. So wow, what a legend.
I must. When this virus is all over, I'll have to go for a drive and jump on the train, the driverless train.
And it's getting longer too, Fred.
Yep.
Once that Metro 2 kicks in, she'll be,
another terrific. There's that much good work going on in Sydney. I wish I was 20 years younger, mate. I'd be killing it. I'd love it.
Well, anyway, I'm going to get to this because it's really interesting. And like you say, 20, 30 years on, and that's one of my questions to all the people that come on to Let's Talk Tunnelling, especially the ones that have been in the industry so long. If you could pen something or write something on a piece of paper, one little bit of advice, send it back 30 years to that Fred that bloody almost tipped his boat over and then headed off to that first job. If you had that piece of paper on the way to that job that you wrote 30 years by, what would you write down for that Fred? What sort of advice would you give? Just only has to be one.
Don't be a sheep following the leaders all the time. Think for yourself and put in the effort, because this industry effort is well rewarded. You get rewarded rapidly. You put in the right effort. People may not say anything, but they notice, and then even if it's not that job, you're called up straight away. You're the first cab off the rank on the next job. So, just because some guy is moaning about this or that doesn't mean you have to. You just make your own decisions and, go for it. You'll go places in this industry.
Yeah, good one. Oh, brilliant.
Not mentioning any names, but for example, you mentioned my son the other day. He started off just he got a job as a shovel hand, just as a straight out labourer to shovel up shotcrete rebound, because a couple of the shotcreters were pretty crazy in the amount they were dropping on the ground, and so that was his first start. And he worked so hard that foremen used to come up to me and say, "Geez, that kid of yours can go." I'd say, "Bullshit! You don't need to suck up to me. Just, let him go, give it to him if he's not performing." No, he is. And before you knew it, now he's got every ticket known to man, and first new job comes up, superintendents are wanting him on it, and so he's only been doing it about 10 or so years, maybe a bit more, and now driving TBMs, road headers, as I say, everything that moves underground there, he'll drive it. Cranes, franners, and that's just an example of how, if you put in the effort, you will be rewarded in this industry. And that's not because he's a relation of mine or anything, because we've never worked on the same site anywhere. I made that a condition when he started. He's been on the same project as me, but not on the same site. So there was never.
This leads me to something then, Fred, because like I said, kids in the industry, especially following in after their old man or an uncle or something like that, and having that name, like how hard is it as a father? And I know how my brother and I, we come into the industry because Dad was in the industry, and it was pretty much, just a follow on family-wise. I know for my father was probably that old school mentality was exactly like you. Just, if I'm doing something hard, just let him go. He'll be right. And I know my father's words were, "It's a character builder, son," because I struggled a little. My brother was different to me. Like he preferred and he liked the physical nature of mining when we first started, and then the tunnelling side of it, especially air legging, because there was a lot of handheld gear back then, and he was just built for that. Where I was more an observer and would want to go and jump on, say, jumbos or even trucks and stuff like that. But even during the hard times, and with your old man there, I remember, he started us off at the bottom, and I went through it because I just thought that's what you do. And then I saw these kids coming in after me, but they were, up the ladder a little bit. I sort of took it really hard. Like me personally, I was like, "Oh, how does that happen?" And then years later, I said to the old man, I said, how come you didn't get me up the tree a bit? Because he was doing all right. He was quite well known, well respected, and he had a really, leadership role. And he said to me, you'd be better off in the long run. You'd be better off. Nothing will be able to touch you later on in this industry because it is tough, and you'll come across some tough times, but you'll know how to handle it because you've been there and done it. Do you believe in that?
Yeah, definitely, because you made a valid point. Nowadays, quite often you see young guys come into the industry and they've only been in there a couple of months, and next thing they're wanting to drive the road header or drive the TBM and that sort of thing. And you think, Jesus, there's a learning curve. You've got to see the consequences of what you do when you're on that road header. You need to be aware of what your actions mean, what the implications are if you do stuff up and hit a service pipe or compressed air line or something. Whereas, previously there was always a lead in to, you learnt to walk before you learnt to crawl before you walk, is what I'm trying to say. And